The radar screens gave no warning. One moment the water was quiet. The next, every sensor aboard the destroyer was screaming. That night in the Red Sea did not make the front pages. But inside the Pentagon, it changed everything. What followed was the largest American naval mobilization in the Middle East in more than 20 years, and most people still do not fully understand what is actually at stake. There is a reason the United States keeps some of the most powerful warships ever built permanently positioned near the Middle East. It is not sentiment. It is not habit. It is pure strategic necessity. The waters surrounding this region, the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, the Arabian Sea, the Strait of Hormuz, collectively form the most economically and militarily critical maritime corridor on the planet. Approximately 30% of all seaborne oil in the world passes through the Strait of Hormuz alone. The Suez Canal, which connects the Red Sea to the Mediterranean, handles roughly 12 to 15% of total global trade by volume. These are not background statistics. These numbers represent fuel for power plants, components for factories, food for grocery stores, medicine for hospitals. All of it moving through waters that are now the center of a major U.S. warships operation in the Middle East. When those waters are threatened, the entire architecture of the global economy trembles. And right now, they are being threatened in ways that have not been seen in a generation. To understand the full scope of what is happening, the story has to begin where it actually began, not where it became convenient to start telling it. Yemen has been at war with itself since 2014. A civil war that drew in regional powers, created one of the world's worst humanitarian catastrophes, and produced a fractured landscape where multiple armed factions control different parts of the country. Out of that chaos, one group emerged as the most militarily capable and the most ideologically rigid, the Houthis, formerly known as Ansar Allah. The Houthis control the Yemeni capital Sana'a. They control the port city of Hodeidah, which happens to sit directly on the Red Sea. And they are backed, armed, and supported by Iran. Not in a casual or symbolic way. In a direct, material, strategic way. Iran has supplied the Houthis with ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and one-way attack drones that are built on the same technological lineage as Iranian weapons used across the broader Middle East. The Houthis have taken these weapons and turned them into something that was previously almost unimaginable, a sub-state armed group capable of threatening global shipping lanes and the warships of the world's most powerful military. That capability transformation is what triggered the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East. And it happened faster than almost anyone in Washington anticipated. The timeline matters here, because it reveals how a regional conflict escalated into a global maritime crisis within a remarkably short period. In October 2023, following the outbreak of renewed conflict between Israel and Hamas in Gaza, the Houthis made a public declaration. They announced they would target Israeli-linked vessels in the Red Sea in solidarity with Palestinians in Gaza. Most analysts initially assessed this as posturing. Rhetoric from a regional actor seeking relevance. A few symbolic gestures that would fade quickly under diplomatic or military pressure. That assessment proved catastrophically wrong. By November 2023, the Houthis seized a cargo ship called the Galaxy Leader in the Red Sea. The vessel was linked to an Israeli businessman. Houthi fighters rappelled onto the deck from a helicopter, took the crew hostage, and sailed the ship to a Yemeni port where they put it on public display. 25 crew members from multiple nationalities, none of them Israeli, were held aboard for months. The images of that seizure circulated globally and sent an unmistakable signal to shipping companies, insurance underwriters, and naval planners worldwide. This was not posturing. This was capability. What followed over the next several months was a sustained campaign of maritime attacks that has few modern precedents in terms of scope and persistence from a non-state actor. The United Nations Conference on Trade and Development documented that container ship transits through the Suez Canal fell by more than 66% between late 2023 and early 2024 compared to the same period the previous year. 66%. That collapse in traffic through one of the world's most critical commercial waterways sent shockwaves through freight markets globally. The world's largest shipping companies responded by doing something they had not done in decades: they stopped using the Red Sea route entirely. Maersk, the Danish shipping giant that moves approximately 17% of global containerized trade. MSC, the largest container shipping company in the world. CMA CGM, Hapag-Lloyd, Evergreen. All of them, one by one, announced they were rerouting their vessels around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa. The rerouting added between 10 and 14 additional days to shipping journeys between Asia and Europe. That sounds like an inconvenience. In reality, it is a supply chain catastrophe. Those extra days translate into millions of dollars in additional fuel costs, crew costs, port fees, and insurance premiums, per vessel, per voyage. And the insurance costs themselves had gone into a different dimension entirely. War risk insurance premiums for vessels attempting to transit the Red Sea increased by anywhere from 400 to 600% depending on the vessel type and the specific route. Some underwriters refused to cover certain vessels at any price. The financial mathematics of this crisis are brutal and direct. Every container ship rerouting around Africa adds approximately $1 million in additional costs per voyage for larger vessels. Multiply that by thousands of voyages. Then consider that those costs do not disappear, they get passed along the supply chain until they eventually land on the price tag of products sitting on shelves in stores in Europe, in the United States, in Asia. The U.S. warships operation in the Middle East is, among other things, a fight to prevent a regional conflict from becoming a permanent tax on global commerce. Washington's initial response was Operation Prosperity Guardian, announced in December 2023. This was conceived as a multinational coalition effort to protect commercial shipping in the Red Sea and deter further Houthi attacks. More than 20 nations were invited to participate under U.S. leadership, coordinated through the U.S. Fifth Fleet headquartered in Bahrain. The coalition that actually formed was more complicated than the ambition behind it. The United Kingdom committed naval assets and eventually participated in direct strike operations. France deployed a frigate but operated under its own rules of engagement rather than the unified coalition command. Canada, Italy, the Netherlands, Spain, and Bahrain offered various levels of support. But several of the most strategically important regional partners, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, declined to formally join. For these governments, publicly aligning with a US-led military coalition conducting operations against a Yemeni faction carried domestic political risks they were not willing to assume, regardless of their private calculations about Houthi aggression. Egypt's reluctance deserves particular attention because Egypt has perhaps the most direct economic stake in Red Sea security of any nation in the world. The Suez Canal generated approximately $9.4 billion in revenue for Egypt in the 2022 to 2023 fiscal year. After the Houthi attacks caused shipping traffic to collapse, that revenue stream was severely disrupted, hitting a country that was already grappling with 30% annual inflation, a collapsing currency, and mounting foreign debt. Egypt was being economically devastated by the Houthi campaign and still calculated that formal participation in the coalition was too politically dangerous. That calculation reveals something important about the political environment in which the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East is being conducted. This is not a situation where American military power can simply impose its preferred outcome. The political terrain is as complex and contested as the physical one. The direct military strikes began in January 2024. The United States and United Kingdom, working together, launched coordinated attacks on Houthi military infrastructure across multiple locations in Yemen. The targets included radar systems used to track and target vessels, missile storage and launch facilities, command and control infrastructure, and drone manufacturing and storage sites. U.S. Central Command confirmed strikes across more than 60 individual targets in the initial phases of the campaign. The weapons employed included Tomahawk land attack cruise missiles fired from U.S. Navy guided missile destroyers and cruisers positioned in the Red Sea and adjacent waters. F/A-18 Super Hornet strike aircraft launched from the decks of U.S. aircraft carriers contributed to the strike packages. British Royal Air Force Typhoon jets operating from Akrotiri Base in Cyprus participated alongside American aviation assets. The scale of the initial strikes was significant by any measure. Pentagon officials spoke about degrading Houthi capabilities, a carefully chosen word that implies reduction rather than elimination. The stated objective was never to destroy the Houthi movement as a political or military entity. That would require a ground campaign that no one in Washington was contemplating. The objective was narrower and more specific: impose sufficient cost on Houthi military infrastructure to change their operational calculus regarding attacks on shipping. The results were more complicated than the planning anticipated. The Houthis did not stop. They absorbed the strikes, made public statements celebrating their resilience, and within days launched additional attacks on vessels in the Red Sea. From a purely tactical standpoint, this outcome was not surprising to everyone in the intelligence community. The Houthis have spent years, with Iranian assistance, dispersing their weapons stockpiles, hardening their infrastructure, and preparing for exactly this kind of attrition campaign against a technologically superior adversary. They learned, from studying other conflicts involving American air power, that survivability requires dispersion and concealment rather than concentration and fortification. The U.S. warships operation in the Middle East thus confronted from its earliest stages a fundamental asymmetry that continues to define the challenge: the most powerful naval force in human history, applying its most sophisticated weapons, against an adversary that survives precisely by refusing to present the kind of targets that sophisticated weapons are designed to destroy. The hardware deployed in this operation is worth understanding in concrete terms, because it illustrates both the extraordinary power the United States has brought to bear and the nature of the tactical challenge it faces. A Nimitz-class or Gerald R. Ford-class aircraft carrier is arguably the most complex machine ever constructed and operated by human beings. The Gerald R. Ford, commissioned in 2017, cost approximately $13 billion. It displaces approximately 100,000 tons when fully loaded. It carries between 70 and 90 aircraft of multiple types: strike fighters, electronic warfare aircraft, early warning aircraft, helicopters for anti-submarine warfare and search and rescue. It can generate approximately 160 aircraft sorties per day using its electromagnetic aircraft launch system, a technology that replaced the older steam catapults and represents a significant advance in operational capability. Its crew numbers approximately 5,000 people. It is powered by 2 nuclear reactors that give it essentially unlimited range. It can operate indefinitely without refueling, limited only by the fuel requirements of its aircraft and the food supplies for its crew. Surrounding the carrier are the vessels of the strike group, typically 2 guided missile cruisers or destroyers equipped with the Aegis combat system, one of the most sophisticated air and missile defense systems ever deployed. These ships carry the standard missile family of interceptors, capable of engaging ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and aircraft at ranges that were previously impossible for ship-borne weapons. They also carry Tomahawk cruise missiles for land attack, torpedoes for anti-submarine warfare, and an array of sensors and electronic warfare systems. Operating beneath the surface, invisible and unacknowledged in most public briefings, are attack submarines. Los Angeles-class and Virginia-class nuclear-powered attack submarines can operate for months without surfacing, collecting intelligence, tracking adversary vessels, and standing ready to contribute to strike operations. Their presence in any theater of operations is rarely confirmed officially, but their role in the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East is understood by anyone familiar with American naval doctrine. At the peak of regional tensions, the United States maintained 2 full carrier strike groups operating simultaneously in the broader Middle East theater. The last time that happened was in the immediate aftermath of the September 11 attacks. The fact that it happened again speaks to the seriousness with which the Pentagon assessed the threat environment. The Iranian dimension of this operation is where the strategic picture becomes most complex and most consequential. Iran does not command the Houthis in the way a military headquarters commands its units. The relationship is better described as one of strategic partnership, ideological alignment, and material patronage. Iran provides the weapons, the training, the technical expertise, and the intelligence. But the Houthis make their own decisions about when, where, and how to employ what Iran provides. This distinction matters enormously for understanding the limits of what the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East can achieve and what it cannot. If Iran directly controlled Houthi operations, then credible pressure on Tehran, economic, diplomatic, or military, might translate relatively cleanly into a reduction in Houthi attacks. The relationship is not that clean. The Houthis have their own motivations, their own domestic political calculations within Yemen, and their own assessment of what the Red Sea campaign is achieving for them in terms of regional prestige and fundraising. They have become, in the minds of many in the Arab world, the one faction that is doing something in response to the Gaza conflict. That reputational benefit has value to them that is entirely independent of Iranian instructions. Iran, meanwhile, has been conducting its own careful calibration. Tehran has consistently denied supplying the specific weapons used in the most provocative attacks. It has avoided any action that could be construed as a direct military attack on U.S. naval assets, understanding, correctly, that such an action would cross a threshold that could trigger a response of a magnitude that Iran's military cannot withstand. Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps Navy vessels have conducted what American officials describe as unsafe and unprofessional interactions with U.S. warships, coming extremely close, sometimes at night, sometimes without running lights, but stopping well short of direct engagement. This is the shadow confrontation that runs parallel to the more visible U.S. warships operation in the Middle East. Iran probing. The United States watching. Both sides measuring the other's red lines with extreme care, because both sides understand that miscalculation in these waters could escalate into something that neither is prepared for. The intelligence war being conducted in parallel with the kinetic operations is, in many ways, the most consequential dimension of the entire campaign, and the least reported. U.S. Navy P-8 Poseidon maritime patrol aircraft have been flying extended missions over the Red Sea, Arabian Sea, and Persian Gulf throughout this period. These aircraft are extraordinary intelligence collection platforms. They carry advanced radar systems capable of tracking surface vessels at long range, magnetic anomaly detectors for locating submarines, signals intelligence collection equipment, and communication relay systems that allow them to feed data in real time to ships, submarines, aircraft, and ground commands simultaneously. Each flight covers an enormous area and generates intelligence products that inform operational decisions at multiple levels of command. The signals intelligence picture has been particularly revealing. American intelligence agencies have developed significant insight into how Iran manages its weapons supply chain to the Houthis. The weapons do not travel directly from Iranian ports to Yemeni ports. They move through intermediaries, through third-country vessels, through networks of front companies and cooperative port authorities. Components travel separately and are assembled closer to the point of use. The network is sophisticated and has been refined over years of operation under pressure from international sanctions and interdiction efforts. Disrupting this supply network has become one of the central tasks of the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East. Multiple interdictions have been carried out in the Arabian Sea by U.S. naval forces working with special operations units. Vessels have been stopped, boarded, and found carrying weapons components. Ballistic missile parts, drone components, propellant materials, assessed to be of Iranian origin and bound for Yemen. These seizures rarely make major headlines, but they represent a significant operational investment and reflect the intelligence picture that American analysts have developed of the Iranian supply network. The Houthi weapons arsenal that has made this entire crisis possible deserves careful examination, because understanding what the Houthis can actually do technically explains why the U.S. warships operation in the Middle East is far more complex than a straightforward contest between a superpower and a militia. The anti-ship ballistic missile is the most alarming element of the Houthi inventory. Ballistic missiles, unlike cruise missiles or drones, follow a trajectory that takes them high into the atmosphere before they descend on their target. Their terminal phase, the final seconds of flight as they dive toward the target, involves speeds that can exceed Mach 5. At those speeds, the engagement window for defensive systems is measured in seconds. The Aegis combat system and the SM-6 and SM-3 missiles it employs are capable of intercepting ballistic missiles. This has been demonstrated in tests and, during this operation, in combat. But each intercept of an anti-ship ballistic missile consumes an expensive and finite defensive resource. SM-6 missiles cost approximately $4 million each. SM-3 missiles cost more. And the Houthis are firing weapons that cost a tiny fraction of what it costs to shoot them down. This economic asymmetry is not a minor tactical inconvenience. It is a strategic problem. The Houthis, with Iranian replenishment, can sustain this campaign at a cost that is essentially manageable for them. The United States, in depleting its defensive missile inventories to protect commercial shipping and its own vessels, is consuming resources that are expensive and take time to replace. Defense industry analysts and congressional critics have raised this calculation explicitly. The United States cannot maintain this defensive expenditure rate indefinitely without either accepting some risk or significantly increasing missile production capacity. The drone threat presents a different but equally serious problem. The Houthis have employed one-way attack drones, essentially flying bombs, in large numbers. Individual drones are inexpensive, in some cases costing as little as tens of thousands of dollars to produce. They have been launched in swarms, with multiple drones attacking simultaneously from different directions to complicate defensive responses. Shooting down a cheap drone with $1 million missile creates an economic ratio that is deeply unfavorable to the defender. The U.S. military has been forced to develop and deploy alternative intercept methods, including naval gunfire and directed energy systems, to address this problem at lower cost per engagement. The cruise missile component of the Houthi arsenal adds a third dimension. Unlike ballistic missiles, cruise missiles fly relatively low and can be programmed to follow terrain-hugging routes that reduce their radar cross-section and complicate early detection. Unlike drones, they move fast enough to compress response timelines significantly. The combination of ballistic missiles, cruise missiles, and drone swarms, employed in coordinated packages, creates a multi-axis, multi-domain threat that taxes even the most sophisticated defensive systems. That combination, ballistic missiles arriving from above, cruise missiles skimming the surface at high speed, drone swarms coming from multiple directions simultaneously, is not an accident. It is a doctrine. A deliberate strategy designed by people who studied American military power carefully and asked one question: where does it break? The answer they found was not in firepower. The United States has more firepower than any adversary could reasonably challenge directly. The answer was in economics. In time. In the psychological weight of a threat that never stops, never sleeps, and never runs out of cheap weapons to throw at expensive ones. Every night that American sailors stand watch in the Red Sea, they are not just defending a shipping lane. They are defending the assumption that the rules of global order, freedom of navigation, the security of commercial shipping, the principle that a sub-state actor cannot hold the world economy hostage, still means something. That assumption is worth defending. But defending it has a cost that is measured in dollars, in deployments, in the quiet strain on men and women who have been away from home far longer than anyone planned. The U.S. warships operation in the Middle East did not begin with a declaration of war. It did not begin with a congressional vote or a primetime address. It began the way most consequential things in history begin. Gradually, then suddenly, driven by events that accumulated until they could no longer be ignored. What happens next depends on decisions being made right now in Washington, in Tehran, in Sana'a, and in the capitals of every nation whose economy depends on ships moving safely through those ancient, contested waters. The warships are there. The weapons are ready. The question that remains, the one that no missile and no radar system can answer, is whether the political will exists, on all sides, to find a way back from the edge before the next escalation makes the choice for everyone. The Red Sea has seen empires rise and fall along its shores for thousands of years. It has watched fleets come and go. It does not care about the outcome. But the people whose lives depend on what happens in those waters, the sailors on the destroyers, the crews on the cargo ships, the families waiting for medicine and food and fuel that travels through that corridor, they care very much. And that is why this story is not over.